Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome, my name is Kevin Arrow. I am the Exhibitions and Project Manager here at MOCA North Miami. Thank you so much for joining us for Conversations at MOCA, Life and Spirituality in Haitian Art. Tonight, we are honored to host Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels, Boston College Assistant Professor of Art, History and Africana Studies, and Haitian Oungan Jean Daniel Lafontant. Before proceeding, MOCA acknowledges that we stand on the current and ancestral home of the Seminole and Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida. We further acknowledge the Calusa, Jaiga, and Mayaimi and Tequesta peoples, all historic caretakers of this land. We honor and thank them for their past, present, and future stewardship of Southern Florida. We would also, before we begin, like to pause to honor the 2.5 million worldwide COVID-related deaths, 500,000 of which has occurred in the United States. This evening, we plan to delve into the spiritual and the healing aspects of the paintings in the MOCA North Miami exhibition, Life and Spirituality in Haitian Art, selection from the Betty and Isaac Rudman Trust collection, which was curated by Francine Beerbrager Rosenzweig. This exhibition remains on view until March 14th. MOCA North Miami programs and exhibitions are made possible with the generous support of the North Miami Mayor and Council and the City of North Miami and the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs. We would also like to thank our Board of Trustees, our corporate and foundation partners, and our members. Conversations at MOCA is presented by the Green Family Foundation, and we extend a heartfelt thanks to all for your meaningful support. So now for some introductions. Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels is an assistant professor of art history, Africana studies, and theology at Boston College. Her research centers on Africana religions, sacred arts, and material culture and ritual healing traditions in the Black Atlantic. Her first book, Art of the Healing Gods, which is in progress, is a comparative religion project that examines sacred art objects used in Haitian and Congolese healing ceremonies. Daniels was awarded the prestigious Getty American Council of Learned Societies postdoctoral fellowship in the history of art for 2019 and 2020, and she's currently finishing her book manuscript. Jean-Daniel Lafontant is a very well-respected Oungan, a Vodou priest, and the founding member of Temple Na Vevé in Haiti. He is also founder of ANE, a New York-based association specializing in the cultural promotion of Haitian art influenced by Voodoo. He serves as a board member for La Musée des Arts Haitiens and also as executive director of the Haitian Cultural Foundation. In recent years, Lafontant has produced and been featured in numerous documentaries, articles, and publications on Voodoo and the art and culture of Haiti, including the acclaimed documentary In the Eye of the Spiral and the CNN series The Believers. Please help me in welcoming the esteemed Dr. Kyrah Malika Daniels from Watertown, Massachusetts, and Jean-Daniel Lafontant, who is currently in the town of Philmont in upstate New York. Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. Let's bring them on. Hello.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Nice to see you both.
Bonsoir, bonsoir.
Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to go off camera and allow the two of you to do your beautiful presentation. And perhaps before you can begin, you might just want to mention what we heard during the intro to the program. Thank you. I'll be back at the end to help with questions.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Kevin.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us, Kevin. I'm pretty happy to be here. And Kyrah, thank you for co-hosting that wonderful event.
It's an honor. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but as I do so, Monsieur Lafontant, would you like to share just a little bit about the song that our guests heard when they arrived?
Evidently, Professor Daniels. The song that we listened to, it's a song for Legba. Legba, after Grand Chimay, is the one who opens the gate and the door for all the spirit to come in. And it's in general, in the course of the ceremony, Legba is the first to be celebrated, so it can actually open the gates for other spirits to come in. So that song is a tribute to Legba, and it's also an opening to our discussion today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And in customary tradition of Haitian culture, we would also like to begin with the libations. Monsieur Lafontant, would you do the honors, please?
Professor Daniels, with honor.
You see, every good Haitian has their babancourt with them.
Today is Wednesday. It's the day we celebrate Ogu Ferai.
Awoshenago.
Awoshenago. And the rum comes right to the point, as it is also the liquor, the favorite liquor of Papa Ogu. Professor Daniel, should we start with maybe a brief history of Haiti, as it is so interlinked with Vodou and we cannot separate it, so
Yes.
people can get a general context before we get right into the paintings?
Absolutely. I will provide a very, very simple overview, and please feel free to jump in, of course. Vodou is a religious tradition that is rooted in African origins. It is understood to be a blend of Indigenous American traditions, European Catholicism, as well as Masonic influences. But at its root, at its core, it is an African religion. If you were to extract the African lineage, it would not continue to exist. Haiti, which was known under its colonial name as Saint-Domingue, was principally populated by enslaved Africans who were forcibly taken from ancient Dahomey, which is now known as current-day Benin, from Yoruba land in Nigeria today, and from ancient Congo, the regions of Congo-Kinshasa, Congo Brazzaville, and Angola. These three different nations, if you will, have formed central pillars in Haitian identity and in Haitian Vodou specifically. The religious tradition understands that there is a high God, a supreme God known as Bon Dieu, which literally translates as good God. Underneath God are many different principles, often referred to as lois. Lois are sometimes known in other parts of Haiti as anges, angels as they are translated, but they are truly principles often connected to different facets of nature, different facets of life. Ogu, as we mentioned, is the day to day we honor Ogu, the spirit of war, of iron, of military presence, also the protector and harborer of justice. There are also female spirits whom we have Lois, such as Erzuli Fredan, Erzuli Dantor, who are known as sisters and who present different elements. We also play an important homage to ancestors in the tradition of Vodou. You cannot have any understanding of this tradition unless you understand that we first honor our ancestors, those who have paved the path before us. And it is understood in Haitian Vodou that human beings are but one creature, one element of the world that animates everyday life. We must exist in harmony with the natural world, with our animal brethren and sistren, with our fellow human beings. And so we exist, if you will, in concentric circles. In Haitian Vodou, it is understood that each community of peoples, each community of entities, the trees, as well as the animals and the plants and the forest, are all part of the cosmic universe. And underscoring all of this is the understanding that Vodou is ultimately about healing and about balance. Making sure that the universe can be in harmony is about making sure that you are honoring your spirits, naming your legacy, recognizing your ancestors, and striving in your everyday life to create a greater sense of peace and harmony between oneself and one's community. Monsieur Lafontant, would you like to add anything?
It's going to be very hard for me to add anything to that, as it is exactly to the point. The small addition that I would make is that Vodou started in Haiti the day that the first African came to the Americas,
yes,
probably on the boat of Christopher Columbus. When they arrived, they met the natives of the land, they were merry nation of the natives of the land. And those natives, particularly in the first quarter of the occupation of the Americas by the colonialists and the slave masters, whether they were Spanish, English, French, or from whatever country from Europe, Vodou started then. And in that first quarter, I would say for the first 100 or 120 years, the mixing of those Africans that came from the different regions of Africa, they met with the multiple natives who were residing in that particular basin of the Caribbean. And they were, not only their culture was merged, because they've learned a lot from each other's culture, but I think that in many ways, and in many of Vodou tradition, as a matter of fact, the further you go in the countryside, you find the raw practices of these natives, because they were the one who gave to those Africans the secret of the land, of its fauna, of its flora. And many of the spirits that we have in Vodou, they are certainly found in Africa, because the basis of Vodou is really African. But the natives also served, if you want, those very same spirits, particularly the spirits of the sea. And many of the spirits that you find in the Makaya tradition were also spirits adored or by the natives of the land. So our ancestors, the natives, should not be discarded when we speak about Vodou. So even though the entire aesthetic of Vodou, the entire logic of the religion as it is today, is fundamentally African, there is a very big importance that should be given to our ancestors, the native of the land. A research was done in Cuba recently, actually, and they find out that close to 70% of the Cuban population have native bloods, that their DNA shows that there is a certain percentage of the natives.
Yes,
which is something amazing. So we have, and because also in Vodou, we believe that the memory, the experience of ancestors is carried on by us. It's not only given by the DNA, but our capacity to move into different dimensions, which our ancestors marched on. It's important also to bring in that legacy of the natives within the Vodou tradition.
Well, thank you so much. That's such an important part of our history and herstory, and one that is very often neglected. The Taino ancestors are an essential part of this tradition.
Yes.
And so with that, we're going to go ahead and begin. We want to share with you here our 6 paintings that we'll be discussing in greater depth with you all. This is, for us, an ideal opportunity not only to introduce you to the motifs of Haitian religion, of Vodou in these paintings, but also to offer a bit of perspective about the artists themselves. And so Monsieur Lafontant will be sharing with you some details of these different artists and their history, their own orientation, and how that influenced the art that they created. So with that, let us begin. Our first artist whom we'll be featuring is Céleste Faustin.
Céleste Faustin is certainly one of the most interesting Haitian artists. Céleste Faustin was born in the region of Jacques. Let me get to the specific notes that I have gotten, because his history is important and it opens doors to an entire understanding of Haitian art. So we don't want to miss out on that. And as usual, technology not being my forte. Okay. Here it is, yes. Okay, so Céleste Faustin was born in 1948 in a place called Lafontant, in the southeast of Haiti, nearby a very famous town called Jacques. One thing very interesting about Céleste Faustin is that he is the cousin of another famous Haitian painter called Wilmino Domon, who was born in 1925 in the same mountainous region and was a coffee farmer. Domon himself was inspired to take on painting by his cousin, the famous Castra Basile. One of the leading first generation artists from the Centre d'Art movement was actually Castra Basile. Allow me to wear my glasses. This is one of the things that
we allow.
Thank you. Age does so many things to us, including sometimes taking away our vision. And I insist on not wearing them, that's the worst. So the reason why I am actually bringing the familial ties between these artists, it's because as Vodou is practiced in a familial setting, there are a lot of benefits that one gets from each other because of that support system in the laku or in the temple, which is generally called kombit. So there is that kind of link between family that help each other achieve new things. So there is that tradition of bringing a skill or giving access to others to what they do. So this is very important, that family link. And the second reason, it's because if I'm talking about Castra Basile, in many ways, I'm also talking about the fact that I'm talking about Castra Basile is because there is a very important, he is a very important artist also of the Centre d'Art. So moving forward, in Haiti, the community, the village, or the laku is omnipresent. And the loi d'antième de l'habitation very often and intimately depicted in the artwork of most artists, as we are going to see moving forward. Céleste Faustin's grandmother was named Celestina, and she was a very famous mambo in the region of Lafontant, and considered a denti, an old and wise mambo in the region. It is said that Céleste Faustin got his first name as a tribute to Celestina, who herself early on decided that he was, actually viewed in her reading, in her lecture of the Loi, that he was destined to be Ezuli Dantor's son and protégé. And that influenced the work of Céleste Faustin throughout his career. Ute Stebich, the very famous collector, stated that Faustin was named after his grandmother Celestina, who exercised a lasting influence on his life. Through her constant communication with the Loi, she learned that her grandson was claimed from birth by Ezuli Dantor. She ascribed Celestine's exceptional gifts and success to the power of the goddess. on one hand, fascinated and attracted by the religious fervor of his ancestors, Faustin, she says, was on the other hand revolted by it and was torn between accepting and refusing their beliefs. His painting or statements of his ambivalence, as an initiate, I would say that Faustin was not revolted by Vodou. He embraced it. However, fighting local trauma, homosexual ambivalence, exploitation, stereotypes, and his own social and emotional demon, that painful state could have led to his early death at the age of 33. Furthermore, his complex environment and the constant risks between the different world of Haiti, in Haiti, may not have been favorable to his sensitive nature. Faustin was schooled at a very affluent school in Jacques, which is the Lycée Pinchina, and quite often a complex fight between the different strata of society may trigger emotional problems on someone, and in the case, and probably in the case of Faustin. And somehow it is evident in his work that Vodou seemed to always explain this déchirement. I really don't know how to say it. It's like he's torn, you know? So Vodou is more an explanation, a way for him to express it, than being, in my opinion, the cause of him being torn, you know, emotionally. So for that reason, I think that the part of the comment of Utestevich may not be the right one. And
shall we go to the lovely painting?
Yes, we should go to lovely painting as I continue. Yes, let's go to the, yeah. Okay, this is a fantastic painting, actually, but it's more in the style of his cousin, Daumont. Later on, he would move on in a style that is more surrealist. But that painting has a very important but subtle Vodou connotation. For the eye that is not trained, for those who do not understand Vodou, you will see a beggar asking a merchant, evidently on a horse, who is probably heading to the market. This is very important. Early in the morning, asking her for food or for money. In reality, that beggar is no beggar. In the tradition of Vodou, Legba quite often disguises himself as a beggar. And right here, that very specific beggar has one element that symbolizes Legba. It's the black and red that he's wearing, which is a very specific Legba, and a tiny cross in the middle of his shirt. And quite interestingly, the lithograph, the Catholic lithograph that we're seeing right next to that painting is a picture of Legba used generally, because we use a lot of Catholic images. It dates from the colonial period to hide our trade and to hide what we were doing, what we were, or practice of Vodou, in fear of the slave masters, the colon. We use a lot of lithographs, a lot of Catholic cover up, if you want, to mask the practice of our own religion. So that perdured over time. And to date, a lot of these images, Catholic lithographs, are still used primarily, I would say, as didactic tools to teach people about Vodou. because none of us know the story of the saints, and we don't care about their story, as we do whatever we want with them, for that matter. But one important thing is that they are symbolism that we use. In the case of Legba, he's a beggar, he's old, and especially he has a cane. This is what is significant. Another important thing quite often is the color of the clothing, for instance, that we use in the, so you can see that the clutches that he's using is the clutch that the beggar has. And of course, the cross is an element of that symbolism. But what is ours? And Professor Daniels may elaborate more on that because he's really an expert on on both the Vodou tradition of Haiti and many Vodou tradition of Africa. We're going to move to the next picture where we're going to see the Vevé.
Yes, and I wanted to mention
the Vevé of Legba. It is very important to know that we don't have these slides. Yes, okay, yes. The Vevé of Legba. You can see, I have to tell you, I cannot see the Vevé because I'm looking at, okay, here it is. I moved my screen to the left. Okay, the Vevé of Legba has a symbol that resembles a cane, which is a very important symbol, just like the crutch, just like the cane that the beggar has. You see that symbol. People today, particularly young scholars, are linking the Vevé to Africa. In the tradition where I come from, it is said that that heritage was a native's heritage, and that the natives who gave us that heritage didn't know specifically where it came from. They only knew how to use them to canalize energies on that sacred land called Haiti Boyo Kiskei at the time, which translation is not land of mountain as many says, but which translation is the high land. And they said, as they were passing many of these traditions, many of their knowledge, science, and culture, that even thousands of years before them, those who passed on that knowledge to them did not know where they came from. So we can move to the next slide. I'm sorry, Dr. Daniels. I'm sure you have many comments to make.
No, it's fine.
Sure, so
it's our enthusiasm. It's our enthusiasm and our passion for the subject. I only wanted to briefly mention that Monsieur Lafontant is correct in noting that there are so many powerful lineages here. And as importantly as he began our conversation about Vodou, noting that the Taino legacies must be acknowledged, it is noted that many of these Vevé, in fact, could be inspired from Taino sacred drawings on the ground, known as graphic writing systems at times in the United States. And there are also African legacies of these sacred earth drawings that create portals to the other world. In the ancient Congo kingdom, these were known as Tusona or Lusona among Chokwe nations of Congo and Angola. They were used to tell myths. And so as children were growing at different ages and different stages of their lives, they would be given more and more intricate patterns to mark in chalk or in earth or in clay. And as they grew older, they would learn more of the story, more of the myth. And still today in the Vodun tradition of Benin, which is one of our most important potomitan, if you will, central pillars of origin, you see that Vevé continue to be used, not with as many elaborate and ornate elements as we see here in this Vevé. And so you have, again, this multi-ethnic and plural origins of these sacred art forms. And with that, let's move to our next piece, which is a piece, oh, I'm sorry that it's pixelated here, but I'm hoping that it'll come back. So Rigaud Benoît, please.
Okay, Rigaud Benoît, I have to go to his bio as well, to a short bio of Rigaud Benoît. But this is where the technology kills me. Rigaud Benoît is one of the most fantastic Haitian painters. Rigaud Benoît, as you see, was born in 1911 and was among the first to come to the Centre d'Art as a painter. His work is so elaborated that he was, he's been acclaimed worldwide. But what is interesting about Rigaud Benoît is also from a peasantry background and was encouraged to come to the Centre d'Art very early on by David Peters. What is amazing with his work, and Rigaud is an initiated Southern Oungan. I'm not sure how much he practiced in the town, because quite often Oungan, when they find a trade like art, their practice is actually, quite often as a Oungan, the life of a Oungan can be quite hard. In the sense that you have so much responsibility toward the society, toward the people that you live with, that quite often people default from that responsibility when they find a trade that can inspire them. And the law sometimes even give them a free card to do something. So I'm not sure that Rigaud Benoît was a practicing Oungan, but he is evidently a Oungan, a high initiated, as the picture, his painting depicts details that someone who is not an initiate would not be able to depict. One important thing, we're gonna talk about the tambour assortor, the Hunton and the tambour assortor, and Professor Daniels, I'm sure, will talk, elaborately on that, and I can add a few things. But what makes the difference between his work is the fact that he depicts very particular things about the Hunfort. The Hunfort are the rooms of the spirits, and they are sacred places. So for him to open these doors to the room of the spirits and put elements, very specific elements, some of them sacred, but none of them really dangerously sacred to the point that the common eye could not have access to it, makes two elements visible. Is that he is an initiate who knows what to withhold, and he's a high initiate to show things that many things should be withheld when they should not. So I really wanted to mention that. It's certainly a full-fledged ceremony for assortor, but assortor is the drum of the drum. The size of the assortor vary, can go from 6-7 feet, and they found assortors that were as high as 15 feet. And where I come from a laku called Jisou. They say that some assortors are so high, I've never seen them honestly, but they are so high that they have to be carried by 21 hefty men, and it can only be beat under a maple tree. So the story of the assortor, I'll add a few things about the assortor, because the assortor it's not the mother drum, but it's the drum of the drum. The mother drum is a different drum. But one thing about the assortor in reality is not a drum. The assortor is a spirit, it's a loi, it's a mystère. The assortor is played once a year or under very special circumstances, and there is entire rituals around it. It has to be dressed in a certain way, it has to be fed in the trou tambour, it has to drink. There need to be ceremonies before you can even take the assortor out of its place. So I'll let Professor Daniels elaborate more on the junto and the assortor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this context. I agree entirely with you that the profound nature of this painting is that really only somebody who knows. You have here a peek into what you might see in terms of a baji, in terms of an altar space with sacred potet, I imagine, that are here on top. This is a sacred vessel that holds an aspect of the soul. And oftentimes a household will keep the potet together. People can go home with their potet once they are initiated, but oftentimes they are kept together in community. Just as the new family members are initiated and brought into the spiritual family, their spiritual souls are kept in community. Another point that I might mention here, that we see two different figures here, two, we can imagine, initiates who are either unso, unsikanzo, or who are mambo themselves, who are priestesses themselves, carrying sacred flags. Likely these are drapeaux that would be carried in important ceremonies. You also see a figure here who's holding a sword. So there are these different implements that we can see here present that tell us this is a ceremony that is of the highest regard, one in which you must understand that you are not only honoring and feeding the sacred drum known as Assoto, but the spirit of Assoto, as Monsieur Lafontant said. And very briefly, I'll go back to our previous slide to note that Onto is the spirit of the sacred drum. A secular drum that is used in, any sort of festivity is known as tambour. But when it is baptized, when it is consecrated, when it is fed, and it undergoes its own initiation, its own kazo inside the inner temple, it becomes unto. It becomes a sacred drum. And so this is the Vevé for the sacred drums. And this here is a wonderful image of an Assoto drum.
Yes, and the Hunto is a high initiate who is not necessarily initiate in the same way that most Hunsi are. And the drummer of the Assoto is not only a Hunto, he has to be a Oungan as well as the drum, because having a god, what we call the Assoto god, which is the, a Hunto god, which makes any drummer potent to play that sacred instrument, is not enough for the Assoto. So if you're not a Oungan, you have to be a Hunto certainly, but you also have to be a Oungan or a high initiate to play the Assoto, as the Assoto is a loi.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll move to our next artist.
Yes.
Enguerrand.
Can we have an extra hour and a half?
I know. Can we have a part 2, please?
Yes.
To be mindful of time, we'll try to pick up the pace a little bit. But as you see, it's something we're very passionate about.
Okay, very well. I think that we have, I'm going to try to be very short on the bio. Sure. And another, because the bio of Gou is extremely important. I have written something very special for him, but the bios are also available on the website of the museum, so people can have access to it. But one thing that I have to say about Jacques Enguerrand Gou was not initiated in Vodou. However, it is said that his mother was a servitor of a very prominent peristyle in the area of Croix des Bouquets, and that early on himself and his brother, the Coursel, his younger brother, the Coursel, who is uninitiated and a Oungan himself, used to go around in the different temples in the region of Croix des Bouquets specifically. Evidently, Gou, he's from a different background than all of those guys that we've seen before, because his father is a foreigner, and I think his father is a psychologist who came to Haiti and married his mother. So he's from a more educated background, I would say. He traveled very early to different countries and lived in Spain for a while. And he was one of the first person that was actually brought into the Centre d'Art, because from very early, he was really brilliant at drawing at a very early age. So this is basically his story. He's been in and out of the life of Vodou Temple. And I know at one point he had a breakdown and he was treated in one of the temples in Croix des Bouquets. And the treatment was made by Bossou Troacon, actually, which in my opinion is why he very often uses the head of the bull, because the bull is the offering for the Loi Bossou Troacon, which is depicted here in a lithograph of Jesus of the thorn of the crown. But the thorn of the crown, actually, they say that Bossou can have 3 horns or 2 horns. And this is Bossou 3 horns. So you see you see here also, this is Bossou 3 horns. You see 2 horns and 1 star, which represent actually the third horn. So this is why you quite often see the head of the bull cut in many of his paintings. But it is more, in my opinion, used as a depiction of his personal and internal emotional trauma than it is as a symbolism of Vodou. I think that Vodou is used much more, elements of Vodou, I should say, is used much more as a depiction of his interior and personal trauma. In many ways, just like that artist that we spoke about previously, it's used in a way to describe their personal trauma, much more than it is to describe Vodou. Professor Daniels.
Yes, I would only add to that I entirely agree. I think that's an extremely helpful interpretation of this work, because it draws from surrealist elements. You can see that there is an entrance to perhaps an outdoor region. There's a figure who stands here in silhouette, but the doorway disappears into the table. So you have these surrealist experiences in seeing his works. Here you have what appears to perhaps be a Vevé, but at least as far as to my knowledge, I wouldn't be able to name this. I think it might be his interpretation of a Vevé. So I would say that's the only thing I would add. And I think we can go forward. Our next artist is Gérard Valcin. We had a short film clip, but I think in the interest of time, we'll share the link with everybody so that you can access the short film clip. And perhaps we can share just a little bit about his bio. What do you think, Monsieur Lafontant?
Well, this is the thing. I was hoping that the film would be the bio, so I did not prepare a bio for Gérard Valcin.
Okay. So let's do a short portion of the clip.
Yes, but one thing I want to tell everyone is that the film is extremely important because it also shows the life of many of the artists there in the peasantry. So the scene that you're going to see is the scene of the reality of all the artists pictured in that conversation.
Excuse me, I'm hearing that people cannot hear the sound, so let me stop sharing and reshare. Want to make sure you all can hear the sound. Share sounds.
And I think at the beginning the sound may not show right away. Maybe we should try fast forward it.
Je suis né dans une famille très pauvre. La famille est tellement pauvre. Même l'école, la famille n'est pas capable de payer pour moi.
This is Gérard Valcin at work in his front yard in Port-au-Prince. Valcin had only 3 years of schooling and had to earn his own living as a child. At first he made twine for weaving hats, receiving 2 cents for every 3 yards of twine. Then he worked as a tile setter for 12 years.
Et c'est là et que me tiré profit là et que m'a fait ça. Ça m'a fait là, c'est là que me joigne. C'est là que me joigne ça.
Like many Haitian painters, Valcin received no formal training in art. As a child, he remembers watching an old man in his neighborhood paint voodoo spirits on cardboard, using paints made from lime, eggs, bark, and homemade rum. That's when Valcin began painting. Years later, when he was a tile setter, Valcin met and worked with a group of artists known as Les Foyers des Arts Plastiques.
Et moi, j'ai pris un bagage comme ça, dans un outil qui est comme ça. Je même connais valeur, même même comprendre que ce n'est pas de dentifrice qui a là, à tellement qu'il m'a connaît valeur.
In 1947, Valcin took a painting to the Centre d'Art in Port-au-Prince. DeWitt Peters, the director of the Centre d'Art, had been scouting the countryside for such untrained artists. Peters gave them supplies to continue painting and provided a place to exhibit and sell their work.
And go directly to his work, Kyrah? Or do you think yeah.
The community of artists
Okay. What's interesting about Gérard Valcin that is not totally mentioned here, but he mentioned it later on, is not only a Oungan, a high initiate and an Oungan, just like many members of his family, because many of them are painters actually, but he was also a Freemason. He became later a Freemason. And actually, we have the tendency in Haiti to kind of merge both traditions. As I say very often, nothing will take over Vodou because Vodou at the end always takes over everything. So, so it is quite interesting. So let's talk about that fabulous painting of Gérard Valcin. I will let Kyrah elaborate on one of her favorite topic, which is Simbi, a favorite loi, which is, but one thing that we've decided to mention earlier is that given the importance of the treatment, there is a loi that is actually present. That it's not a person because it's a loi evidently, but that mounted horse, as we call them, the entity that is there is actually the loi Cousin Zaka. This is Cousin Zaka, I have to tell you, and here in that little graph, you see the colors of Cousin. It can be blue or green and often red, even though Cousin uses many different colors. And it is one of the most important lois of the Vodou cosmogony and the Vodou religion. The reason being is that Cousin, and I have to tell you, there is not one loi, there is a family of lois. So there are maybe, I don't know, 40, 50 different Cousins, depending on the region. But he is the minister of agriculture. And many times he also plays the role of the minister of finance, because those two things are very often intertwined. So Cousin generally is from the peasantry. He speaks like a peasant, he eats like a peasant, and he's very, very economic. He's not stingy, but he doesn't spend his money. He's very careful with his money because he knows the cost of hard labor. And he's everybody in the rural area celebrate Cousin. Generally, he has what we call a makout or a halfor, which you can see here. Here you have a halfor, which is represented in his Vevé actually, with the tools that he uses generally. You know, his pipe, he always smoked tobacco leaves. So he's right here with his hat that he always wears. And here you can see a jacut that's hanging also, which is also which is another element of Zaka's attires and attributes. So I'll let Professor Daniels move on with what's going on here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We loved this painting in part because we felt very strongly the presence of not just one, but two lois. It's quite possible that you have a healing ceremony that is so great that it requires multiple different spirits. And here also we felt very strongly that there was a presence of Simbi. Simbi is a spirit that has very deep Congo roots. The name that we recognize as the word for spirit in Haitian Vodou, Loa, in ancient Congo, the name for spirits was Basimbi, or singular is Simbi. And these were often spirits of nature associated with rivers, with pools and ponds, fresh springs, source, as well as trees and land. Simbi in Haiti today is still remembered as a spirit associated with freshwater springs, but also connected to the leaves and to the leaves of healing. And so you see at the bottom, you see a basin. We can imagine this is a bain, a ritual bath that's being given to a patient who's here, and a number of different unsi, a number of different members of the spiritual family are here praying with the elders, with the mambo, and with the Oungan who are conducting this healing. This is one of Simbi's representations. It's a very complex figure, but this is a chromolithograph that's very often used to describe Mamiwata, as well as Simbi, and at times even Aidawedo. This is a Vevé for Simbi. You see the presence of the serpent, which is considered sacred to Simbi. Simbi is considered to be sometimes a serpent himself or herself. There are masculine Simbis, there are also feminine Simbis. And I think that the nature of this particular healing might in fact be a Simbi glow. One thing I'd also like to point out is the symbol here in the center looks like a jar. This could be a govi, a sacred mystic pot, or it could be a krish that is used to hold sacred medicines. And here at the base, we also see next to the basin of leaves and the bath, we see a mystic jar.
That's very good and excellent. And thank you for some of that knowledge too.
We learn from each other.
One important point is that also the lithograph used for Simbi glow is Saint Raphael. So anyone can also Google Saint Raphael, Catholic image Saint Raphael, and see that image that is quite used for didactic purposes in Voodoo. And Saint Raphael is also holding a fish that resembles actually the snake of Simbi and is in water, even though we have to mention that Simbi is in both water and fire. Yes. So very important, yes.
Absolutely. And with that, we will move forward. Oh, we wanted to show you actually an example of a Vevé.
Yes.
Vevé very typically are placed on the earth. We talked about these sacred graphic writings on the earth before, often in a mixture of cornmeal and flour. Cornmeal being very connected once again to the Taino, whose primary food was maize or corn, and flour coming from a different sort of historical context. But this is a grotto of Simbi near Marché des Salines, in an armory. And you see here the presence of a stylized Vevé for Erzulie Freda, and also the sacred Simbi serpent that's associated with this sacred grotto.
Beautiful.
All right, and staying with our same artist of Gérard Valcin, we are moving to one of our final and one of our most magnificent works. This one is Nouveau Monde. Monsieur Lafontant?
Yes, this is an amazing painting because one of my favorite lois is actually Agwe, which is the loi of the sea. It's a loi that's very much feared by many of us because we associate Agwe with the transatlantic crossing. So it's sometimes very painful for us to even talk about that water. And you know, it's interesting enough that in Haiti, they say that most people build their house on the shore, but instead of facing the sea, we face the earth, not to look at it in the fear, living still in the fear of that transatlantic crossing. I mean, evidently you can see a Vevé of Agwe. It's definitely a Vevé of Agwe. It's not very well represented, but it's more general than the very specific boat Vevé, which is 100% Agwe. One thing that is very interesting about that painting, and one thing that I have to mention also, is that many of the mammal, the sea mammals, are considered spirit themselves. Like La Sirène, I mean the mermaid, which we consider to be half sea mammals, half human, and we believe that La Sirène do exist. It's a sea mammal. La baleine, the whales are sea mammals, and I have to tell you that Haiti has the largest population of endemic sperm whales in the entire Caribbean. We have about 500, I mean, it's close to 1,000, the population of 1,000, and the 500 female never travel. The male go back and forth and come back when it's time to mate. And this is interesting because they are located in a triangle between the island of La Gonave, Jérémie, and Petit Goave. Okay, so more or less in the west, in the eastern part, in the western part of Haiti. That triangle is in the western part of Haiti. So this is quite interesting that you can see a representation of all these lois in that very exquisite painting. I mean, of course, Saint Ulrich is the lithograph representation because he carries a fish and he has a baton also that symbolizes the spirit of the waters. Yes, I'll let you elaborate about La Sirène, which I know that you're very fond of, Professor
See,
Daniel.
he's giving me the divine feminine spirits. You notice that there's a trend here. I'm very happy to elaborate. As you mentioned, this is a powerful painting in part because it is very much like the Benoît painting, truly a scene depicted by somebody who knows, somebody who has attended and assisted, participated even in what is called the ceremony of Bac Agwe. So a Bac Agwe ceremony takes place from time to time. It can be very expensive. And so at times a community will gather its resources together. But you see here that there is a bateau, there is a boat of offerings that is being sent out to sea. And one of the things that's so beautiful about African diasporic traditions is you see the similarities, of course, between our traditions. Imanja in Brazil is honored similarly with small vessels that carry offerings to Iemanjá or Yemaya in Cuban tradition, known as Yemoja in Nigerian Yoruba culture. Mami Wata is a spirit who is known to carry a mirror. She is known in West Africa to be a light-skinned mermaid. There are people who have differing opinions about La Sirène. Some say that she is light-skinned, that has become associated with wealth and with affluence. There are others that say, no, La Sirène is a beautiful, beautiful siwomiel woman who has long hair of seaweed that flows down. And so here you see a Vevé for La Sirène. She has different manifestations. This is one particular Catholic lithograph that has been associated with her. I'd like to point out just one or two more things here. This is an important reminder for us that ceremony is not only sacred, but recreational. So you have here figures who are serving as initiates, wading into the water with sacred drapeau, with a sword, seeing the fish, seeing perhaps the whales that are out, knowing that this is La Sirène's wife at times, her sister at other times. The offering is being made for Agwe by these initiates. The Oungan is here with his rattle, his asson in his hand, the drummers are drumming, but also this gentleman is lying. He's having fun, he's enjoying his drink, which is maybe a prestige that I know I would love to be enjoying right now. You have figures who are here on the side who may or may not be initiates, but they've come to see the offerings. And so this is a powerful part of Vodou ceremonies. Many people think this is a secretive tradition. No, it is not that it is secretive. It is that not everyone has access to our knowledge. You have to earn sacred knowledge. You have to demonstrate your loyalty to the spirits, your commitment to a spiritual family. And this is one of the reasons why we guard and protect sacred knowledge. But it is not that it is secretive per se. There are things we keep away from the outsiders, yes, so that they can be protected. But this is also a space where Vodou ceremonies are often spaces where you have people who come who are there to enjoy, who are there to celebrate. And so that's something that's featured here. And with that, I think we can move to our final painting and our final artist, who is Adrien Leontius.
Adrien Leontius. Adrien Leontius is from the island of La Gonâve, which I just mentioned. So the tip of that island is also the tip of that triangle that marks the area where those wonderful sperm whales live. It's important that I read the bio of Adrien Leontius. I know we're short on time, but it's important because Adrien Leontius is a very special individual. And so is the island where he's from. Because for many years, they said that that island of La Gonâve, no one was born in La Gonâve, they used to say. Everybody migrated to La Gonâve, running away from whatever. Sometimes some illegal actions, sometimes just because people were weird and decided to go to faraway places. So in La Gonâve, most of the people there came from another place, from the vicinity of that bay, or called the Gulf of La Gonâve. There are many cities like Oungan, cities like Petit Goâve, Grand Goâve, all the way up to Pestel, Corail, Port-au-Prince. So people who had done things would take a boat at night and just go to the island of La Gonâve. Therefore, the Vodou also practiced in this island. It's a very particular form of Vodou. It's primarily Petro. You will find very little Rada in La Gonâve. And there are a lot of what we call société, people practicing different other rites that are kind of surrounding the core of the Petro that is generally practiced in the island of La Gonâve. So it's a very virulent form of Vodou, and no wonder that Adrien Leontius painted Grand Bois, who is, for those who practice Petro, in a heavy form of Petro, and for many society, the equivalent of local, because Grand Bois is the one that gives the knowledge to those who practice that rite. So it's the equivalent of local in different rite. But one important thing to mention about Adrien Leontius is that, evidently, he was born in 1928 in a place called Ansagalais on the island of La Gonâve. And I already went to that. The island was barely inhabited and started getting actually a lot of recognition after the American occupation. Because for a long time, there is a gentleman, an American captain actually, from the occupation forces, who actually became the husband of a very famous Mabo who was living actually in the island of La Gonâve. So after that great success and the history being written, La Gonâve became a little bit more popular and started having its own children, I suppose. So yes, that's something that I thought I would bring up. But one thing interesting about Leontius is that he worked many trades before being discovered. And this is a lithograph of Saint Sebastian. We don't see it extremely well here, but what I like about that lithograph is that the human becomes one with the tree, becomes one with nature, and that nature and that tree is fed by the blood of that woman. Because blood is not necessarily a negative thing. It's also a symbol of life, because without blood, quite often we die. So that lithograph is very similar to the actual picture of Grand Bois that we see there. So it's quite interesting. So Adrien Leontius worked many trades, and he was discovered actually when I think David Peters was on a quest with André Malraux, who was then the French Minister of Culture. And they saw his drawing on a temple in kind of a shanty town of Haiti. And this is how it was discovered. It wasn't discovered. This is how his work was seen for the first time by those two foreigners that were in Haiti to promote, I suppose, to promote art, but I think that they were not there to promote art. They were astonished, I have to say, by the power of Haitian art, and found nothing, and realized that they had to actually stop and make it public to the world. There's a story of Adrien in his very famous book, L'Intemporel, written about the art of the world and primarily about surrealism. And he stopped the publishing of the book to introduce to that very book an entire chapter on what he had discovered in Haiti lately, which is amazing. So the book is called L'Intemporel. It's a very famous book on surrealism. And he said that he found surrealism as he thought it should be in Haiti. So this is, yeah. So this is what we would say about Leontius. Yeah, I think we're good.
Yes, and I'll just mention a few things here that I think are very powerful. There are many different Haitian painters who portray scenes of nature, but Leontius has done such a magnificent job of including what really looks like tropical flora and fauna here. You see the vibrancy of the colors that you wouldn't see, for instance, in cold Boston, or that you wouldn't see in certain parts of, northern hemispheric regions. And so really the forest is brought alive that way. I want to echo what Monsieur Lafontant has explained, which is that the essence of Grand Bois is tree-like. So his Vévés often depict him as having a trunk for his body. His arms are branches that extend outwards, and his heart face is perhaps the heart of the tree, if you will. Here we see that there is not only a Grand Bois figure who is part of the tree, but there's another spirit of the tree who is present up here in the branches. And one more thing that I'll point out here, to me, this is very indicative of an initiatory space. You may not see the white of initiation, but you see the pestle and mortar that is being used to pound leaves, to prepare leaves for medicine, right? And not only is the human initiate working to make the medicines, but the tree, the giver of medicines, the harbor of sanctuary and also of medicinal plants, is helping to prepare these medicines as well. And so with that, we thought we would leave you with just a minute or two of a song by Boukman Experience. And then we will open it up for questions. So I'm going to exit out here and play a short clip of this Boukman Experience song from Carnival in this year.
We're still in Carnival by the 20th February. Yes. I am really so very happy to listen to that Boukman song. And the reason why it was picked by Professor Daniels and I, first of all, we are still in the period of Carnival. We are in February, that's one. Second, it's a song about Grand Bois, and it's talking also about Corona, about the epidemic. In Haiti, it has not ravaged Haiti the way it has the world, However, what Bookman is saying is that they're talking also about the power of natural remedy. So this is why you see that guy being cured with tea, with leaves, and the annotation about actually Grand Bois come from the fact that Grand Bois is the healer, is the spirit of the forest, and has a total knowledge of all the plants. So this is why I think that Carnival song was extremely significant to the discussion. Should we go to the Q&A? I'm excited. I'm willing to give an hour and a half extra.
I do like the fact that the last slide we ended on, there was the plants involved in the making of the medicine. So we went from the Bookman experience from that painting. So it was a very, very nice segue. Very well thought out. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Kevin. I hope you're not here for the bad news.
No bad news. There's no bad news.
No bad news. So we have an hour and a half extra, right?
We've got over 70 people here in the feed. So I think we've got unlimited time. But
thank you.
We do have several questions, and we've got a lot of people saying hello to you from all over the country. I have a question from our good friend George Fishman, who would like to know if there are certain gender-specific roles within the ceremonies, or can both men and women be instructed and initiated equally, and has this changed over time?
That's a very significant question. I think that for many years, there was a gender role, but I think it's changing. For instance, drummers, it's only recently that we have had women drummers. I have seen a woman La Place. We mentioned a gentleman that was holding a manchete and had two Wunsi carrying the flags behind. I have seen a woman La Place only once. So I would not say that the roles are gender, but some roles are more taken, I think, by women and others more by men. But as far as conducting a ceremony, a mambo and a Oungan, a Oubon or a Oubon, they have exactly the same power. And gender within the tradition itself is not an issue. And I think that maybe Vodou is probably the most open of religion when it comes to general gender issues. And people find a haven actually in Vodou when in many places in our society they don't. But I'm sure that Professor Daniels will elaborate on that, as she is very, very good on that subject.
Oh, well, thank you. But you see what we all did there, right? You saw that I was given the divine feminine, but we began with the Oungan's perspective about gender. So we flipped it for you. You see, men also have a role to play in sharing their perspectives about gender. So thank you so much.
I'm saying Aibobo. I'm saying Aibobo to the Noir because it's their work, not mine.
I would really just echo what Monsieur Lafontant has said here, that I think that African religious traditions, indigenous to the continent and also in the diasporic context, have very different understandings of gender, very different understandings of sexuality. Water spirits, especially, are understood to have a gender identity that is more fluid. An example that we might give on the continent is Olokun. Olokun, the spirit of the deep sea, is regarded in some contexts of West Africa and Nigeria, for instance, as masculine. In other regions of West Africa and certain places like Benin, Olokun can be regarded as feminine. So the same spirit entity can be regarded in two different ways. In the context of Haiti, for instance, Simbi, as we mentioned, is a spirit that has both feminine qualities and masculine qualities. We also have spirits who are queer. So Erjulie Danton is regarded as the patroness of women who love women. And it is said that she is the protector of those who identify somewhere along the spectrum of identity of gender. And so she herself is somebody, it is very understandable that in a tradition where you not only are told that it is not a sin to be gay, to be a lesbian, to be queer, not only is it not a sin, quote unquote, but you have spirits themselves who identify on different points of the spectrum of gender identity, who engage in different relationships. El Rigaud is known to have relationships with masculine spirits as well as with feminine spirits. So Simbi, for instance, is said to be her husband. As we've said, Simbi has masculine and feminine roles. So I think that there is a great deal of room. It's not perfect, there's no doubt about it, but I agree that entirely that there is no knowledge, if you will, that is officially given to male priests or male initiates that is not also given to female priestesses and female initiates. We are regarded as equals, even recognizing our differences.
Thank you. Very good.
Oh, and I just want to mention one very, very quick thing, which is that notably in many African languages, including Kikongo, including Yoruba, you do not use gendered pronouns. So in Haitian Creole, this is the same thing. Li means he, it means she, it can mean a person who identifies somewhere along that spectrum, right?
It means everything.
It means everything, right? Yeah. And so you can understand also, not that gender is not important, but that gender works and functions differently in a society. Thank you to my husband for reminding me of that.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Alexis states, it is said that the three most prominent order or sect of Haitian voodoo are Dahomey, Congo, and Yoruba. And is it possible to identify those sects in Haitian art? And if so, how?
I'm going to let Kyrah elaborate on it, but one thing that I have to mention, there is a very famous professor of ethnology in Haiti who's African. His name is Kingele. And he mentioned once that Haiti is 54 countries of Africa in 27 square kilometers, 27,000 square kilometers. So we find in Haiti, dominantly it's going to be West Africa, but you find elements of tradition of the entire continent of Africa in Haiti, in one part or the other. So Haiti is really, in many ways, a microcosm of the African macrocosm. But I let Kyrah specifically elaborate on that, as she is more versed in the subject of Haitian Vodou and African Vodou.
I think that's so beautifully stated, and I'm appreciative for your framing of this, that Haiti really serves as a microcosm of Africa's macrocosm. And to answer your question, I think that it would be difficult for me to specifically say you can see lineages of Dahomean art styles, or specifically say you can see lineages of Congo art styles, because these traditions were blended. At the time that the Haitian Revolution broke out in 1791, the majority of enslaved peoples on the island were from the African continent. And of that group, 60 to 70% were coming from Central Africa, were coming from Congo. However, we know that earlier in historical periods, there was a significant contingency coming from Yoruba land in Nigeria, coming from Dahomey regions in Benin. And in the earliest periods, in the 16th century, meaning the 1500s, you had a Senegambian population that was being brought over as enslaved peoples. And so till this day, there are still ways that you can see the presence of Muslim influences in the nations of Vodou. I think that this is an opportunity for us to say that, of course, Vodou is incredibly complex. Vodou in the north, where Monsieur Lafontant is from, is quite different than Vodou in the south. Vodou all the way in the west has its own varieties as well. I would say that you can perhaps trace these elements of different African lineages through the nations. It's said that we have 21 nations, and these nations are linked with an African past. You can also trace it linguistically. So for instance, in certain regions, they refer to the male priest not as Oungan, but as Gangan. Gangan most likely comes from Nganga, which is the Kikongo word for priest or priestess or healer. There's another word that I learned recently, most recently in Mimo's Beaubrun's book, Nadomi, which many of you might be familiar with. She refers to Vodou as she experienced it in the north, in Wanamint. Wanamint is a city not only very deep in the north, but also on the border with the Dominican Republic. She refers to the notion of Emi, which is divine breath. Emi in Yoruba, in Nigeria, is regarded as an aspect of your soul. It is a divine breath. So there are these different ways that you can trace African lineages through language, through dance styles. Congo dance looks very similar to Congo dances with the hips, for instance. Through the art styles, I would say it is present, but perhaps not as actively present as in other sectors of society.
Very good. Thank you for that. Napoleon Jones Henderson is in the feed. He's asking can you comment about the relationship of Haitian art and the Germany? Now, I'm not sure if I understand what the Germany is. Maybe it has more meaning to the two of you.
I think I made a comment about Ute Stebik, who's acquired one of the largest collection of Haitian art, and Ute is from Germany. Ute and her husband were one of the most prominent Haitian art collectors, are from Germany. And maybe I think that I was relating to her comments, and maybe that's linked to that, but in reality, I don't think that there is, I'm not versed in art enough to talk about German art and Haitian art, honestly. Vodou is my sphere of expertise. So I would leave that question for the expert, if that's leading toward this way. So I think that may be that. It was a reference to Ute Stebik from Germany, but it was only a reference.
Thank you. From Petrouka Mois, can you elaborate on how important is the use of color in the association of Iwas and how the protocol is used in the artist presented?
Well, first, Bonsoir, I have to correct that name for you.
Thank you, please.
Kevin, oh yes. And you better thank me for that, otherwise you're going to get in trouble.
I've got my pen handy. I'm ready.
Petrushka,
yeah.
Yes.
Petrushka.
This is Russian. So you should be able to say it better than I do. Petrushka Moise is a high scholar specializing in Haitian art. So I would let a scholar like her answer that question.
I would defer to Dr. Moise as well.
Yes. So,
no, but of course, color is so important. And it's such a thoughtful question that you're posing because, color is fascinating. It's not something that remains fixed. So in Haiti, Ogou's colors are red and blue. You see, we both have our reds and our blues with us today. But in Nigeria, Ogun's color is green. It is the color of the forest. That's where he resides. In different parts of Brazil, Ogun is associated with blue. And so it's fascinating to see the way that these colors are so specific to regions, are so specific to particular lineages. And I do think that to a certain extent, artists take liberties with colors and perhaps use colors that may or may not necessarily be associated with particular loi, with particular spirits. But I do think that it's of great note. And I also will point out that I see, Dr. Moise, you asked another question, which is, did the artists return to their Vodou practices or go back to their respective temples after their time at Centre d'Art? Or did they fully immerse themselves in a life of art? And I'd love to hear about this from Monsieur Lafontant, whom I think will have more of an answer.
It's very hard for me to specifically answer that question. But one thing that I have to say is that many of the artists that from the Centre d'Art, actually, they are Oungan, Mambo, and Vodouvi and Serviteur who never left their temple. I can talk about Hector Hippolyte. I can talk about André Pierre. I can talk about Saint-Brice. I can talk about so many artists which are Vodou priests who never really left their temple. And one thing also that people have to know is that you never leave your temple, because in reality, you can leave the facility, you can leave the Vodou, Badji, etc., etc. But the temple is in you. So wherever you go, I'm here in Fairmont, and believe me, I am in my temple. Wherever I am, I carry maybe a few things, maybe a few flags to put me in the mood. But even if I have no elements, if I have access to the 4 elements, which is fire, earth, water, and
Air.
what we breathe, the air that we breathe, I am Vodou. This is all I need to be Vodou, because Vodou is not outside of me, it's within me. So it's, I'm sure that artists after a while may retire to their land of origin, or I mean their land of origin, to their Badji, to their Lakou, to their village. But it's not, I don't have a specific answer to that very question, as I have not inventory the number of artists that did, but I'm sure that some did.
Thank you. I want to ask a question on behalf of, and I'm sorry if I don't pronounce your name properly, Monsieur Lafontant will correct me. Yannick Hume asks, I am curious about the space afforded to the sacred or voodoo cosmology in the works of contemporary artists, and do we see the same commitment of the spiritual within the visual?
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Yannick.
I was good. I got it.
Yes, but do you see how subtle Professor Daniels is? Yes.
Dr. Hume, thank you so much for this question. It's an important one, and one that is very exciting to me, because I think that there is a sense that Haitian Vodou is only portrayed in our elders' artwork, in the artwork of the past, of the early 20th century, the mid 20th century. And it's simply not true. That is perhaps where it began to express itself for the first time in a more public fashion, though we know that sacred art forms have continued as a long legacy in Vodou, with drapeau, with beaded and sequined different objects and things like that. So the material culture, the material religion has lived as a vibrant sacred art form. But I would say that there are many sacred artists today who are continuing this legacy of honoring Vodou as a religion, of honoring ancestral ties. I would actually say that someone who's here with us, Dr. Petrouchka Moïse, who is herself an incredibly talented visual artist, is somebody who is bringing the presence of Vodou in her work. I can think of several other Haitian artists, Dr. Gina Athena Ulysse, who is a multimedia artist. She sings songs of, offering, if you will, incantations in her poetry. There is a way in which her visual work in material culture draws upon stereotypes of Vodou. And demystifies the tradition itself. There is the artist, the incredible artist, Vladimir Sibyl Charlier, whose work honors not only the Vodou Loi, but also the Catholic saints, and she reinterprets them in a way that engages with not only the African heritage of saints, but also with the, especially if we're thinking about Congo, the ancient kingdom of Congo, which was Catholic as early as 1491, a year before Columbus arrives in the Americas. The kingdom of Congo was converted to Catholicism. So you have a long legacy there of blending African religions with Catholicism. So I'd say that there are a good number of artists who are really demonstrating that Vodou continues to live on in their artwork, who continue to be inspired by the tradition, whether they grew up in the tradition or not. And I think that's something to really point out, because you have those who are from an elder generation who may, like some of these artists, have grown up in the tradition. You also have younger members of a new generation who are interested in learning more about Vodou, who are interested in tapping back into the tradition that they weren't allowed to learn about growing up because of, we know, the devastating effects of Protestantism on the Vodou religion. So I think the legacy remains.
Wonderful. I mean, that also answered Mr. Patterson's question, who says that we've seen some famous artists today, but who is working artists today that you think will be remembered tomorrow and in the future? And I think you covered that, but I don't know if you want to add any other names to that, but I think.
Go ahead and write them in the chat because I don't want to
Yeah.
leave folks out, and a whole
Yep.
bunch of them are going to be women. So y'all can
Yep.
also do them at the same time.
Okay. And Napoleon has a wonderful comment here that if one leaves their temple, they are more likely than not to create work that is void of communication with others, and that color is the connection to the soul.
I partly agree, only partly. Mr. Napoleon has to understand that the temple, the knowledge, the Vodou is not outside of you. It's not in the physical temple. It is in you and within you. So you can take it anywhere. You are still a Vodouism. However, from my own experience, because I spend a lot of time abroad, it is important to resource yourself in the what I would call the Mecca, in the motherland, in that haven of Vodou, which is Haiti. Because I really got to believe that the land itself and the energy of its people have something terrific. So once you go back, you resource yourself, you get back that energy, which after a while may die in an environment. For instance, I'm in the US right now, I'm in the cold. There are things that I have to do in nature, but I cannot be barefoot. I haven't tried that. So evidently the environment is conducive to your practice and to your spirituality, but it's not a necessity for you to be in Haiti, to be a Vodouisant, and to express your emotion, your feeling through the art as someone that's kind of no longer have that energy. So that would be my answer to Mr. Napoleon.
Thank you. And Napoleon just has a response that says, that is exactly what I mean. Thanks for the expansion of my comment. And I meant that the temple is the artist, not the structure itself.
Yes.
Very good. So do either of you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make, or perhaps tell us about anything that's happening for you in the future, in the next few weeks, months, years? Any thoughts? I know you're finishing your book, Dr. Daniels. We'll have to keep our eyes out for that. And we hope, Jean-Daniel, that you'll be coming to Miami soon. And
I'm looking forward to come to Miami soon. But one thing that I would add to that, I really would like to work with MOCA
yes,
on an exhibit on Vodou and contemporary artists living in the US. That's and I'm really grateful. I am really grateful, and that was brought because of what you share with me with Sibyl Charlier, and actually I've been working with different artists here in the US that have so much Vodou in their work, but it's a different narrative because of the totally contemporary and sometimes abstract aspect of that. And I would be very excited in helping MOCA put something like that together. And I'm also grateful for all those who attended that fantastic discussion, I have to say. I'm bragging a little bit, but please, yes. And I'm particularly thankful to MOCA and the MOCA staff and the Family Green Foundation. Mireille and Kimberly, I love you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.
I think we all agree. That's wonderful. Is there a name? Do you have a title for your book, Kyrah? Someone is asking in the feed.
Oh well, it's on its way to being birthed, but still in the womb.
Okay, all right. We'll have to.
For now, the name of the book is Art of the Healing Gods. And I'm happy to share my academia webpage. If anybody's interested in checking out any of my other articles, I have my articles listed here. I just want to echo Monsieur Lafontant's gracious thanks to the Green Family Foundation, to the MOCA Institute. Thank you so much for this gracious invitation to have us join in dialogue. Thank you so, so much, Monsieur Lafontant, for the invitation to join you in conversation. This is really a dream. And if I may bring something into manifestation, perhaps you and I could envision one day and then manifest one day this contemporary Vodou art exhibition. We're putting it live here. I'm putting it into the universe. I think it could be done beautifully at MOCA.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think,
and 70% of their constituency in the town of North Miami is Haitian, by the way. And many of the elected officials in that town are also Haitian. So I hope that they understand the good work that MOCA is doing and that they appreciate the involvement of MOCA for that very Haitian community. Please pass it on to these guys, Kevin.
Thank you.
Please.
No, if the Port-au-Prince show, gave them a taste, then that was the how should you say the
Lake Bar. That was the Lake Bar, the opener.
The opening of the doors. So now we've thrown the doors wide open and we've prepared the ground. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight. That brings us to the end of tonight's program. Thank you both for sort of blessing this space. Again, we're dedicating this to all of the people out there who are undergoing hardship due to COVID, and our prayers are with all. We want to ask everyone to return to Conversations at MOCA on March 10th. We'll be joined by Miami-based artist Pepe Mar and Chicago-based writer and filmmaker Mark Holt as they discuss the infamous and legendary artist Craig Coleman, better known as Varla, and the cultural renaissance of the 1980s and 90s South Beach. And then this Friday, February 26th at 7 p.m., please be sure to check out the virtual Jazz at MOCA with Jean Cause Sextet. You can hear that on your radio, 88.9, or you can tune in at mocanomi.org for a live jazz show. And we encourage everyone, as always, to visit our website, follow us on social media channels for up-to-date information about MOCA's programs and exhibitions. Please come see this exhibition and see these paintings in person, because you got a taste of them this evening, but when you're in front of these paintings, you will understand. They've got an incredible presence. So thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next time. Signing off from Miami. Good night, everyone.
Ay, bobo.
Ay, bobo.